there guys, I'm your resident fantasy therapist. Welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, hi. My name's Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first 2 novels, one the start of a series and one a standalone. And on my channel I like to talk about the psychology of writing, behind the characters, behind the world. Because to me that's what makes a book and a story interesting. So today I wanted to talk about, I don't know if it's necessarily a trope, I think it's more a trend. And predictability does not make a bad story. Okay, so this topic rose up a little bit ago because I've seen people kind of talking about this. Basically, it came from the subverting tropes, the subverting expectations in your story. And I am of the belief that subverting tropes and expectations, while it can work well, it is not required to make a story good. I have read so many books where they followed tropes and they like played tropes out. You know, the hero goes and saves the princess or whatever. And they played tropes straight. You know, here's the trope and that's what we're doing. And they still work. They still work. And I think some people have this idea that if they can see where the story's going, then they don't like it. It's not interesting. Now, if that is your preference, you know, absolutely, that's your right. That's how you prefer books and movies, and that's fine. But for the most part, I don't think predictability equals boring or equals a bad story. And let me see if I can explain to you guys why. Because usually when we talk about stories and books, we talk about, you know, oh, you have to be unique. You have to do it a different way. You have to give it a new twist. And all those things are still true. You still need to have a unique spin on something. You still need to have characters and situations that people probably haven't seen before, or at least haven't seen done in that specific way. But that does not mean that you have to try and subvert every single trope in your story. And let me give you guys an example of one that people hate when you subvert, and that is found family. So found family is a trope of you have these people from different areas and they come together and they form their own family, and this is now their rock. Subverting this trope is usually when the found family breaks apart, and people hate it. I can't tell you how many people I've run into. They're like, oh yeah, this book was good, but then the found family broke apart and that sucks. You know, so that is a trope that people like. And when you like a trope, you want to see it played out to the end. So I think this predictability equals boring kind of comes from tropes that people don't necessarily like. So, you know, the trope of the damsel in distress. Not a lot of people like that trope anymore. But you could still play it out and play it straight and have it work. Princess Bride is a good example of that. You know, Buttercup for the most part is a victim through most of the story, but people still like it because they like her chemistry with Wesley and they like the humor and all these other things. So why is it that I personally like it when some tropes are played straight? Well, it's a psychological component actually, and we call it flow. And what it means is essentially flow is when you are in a state of essentially relaxation and mood where like outside little things no longer bother you. So you're kind of in the zone, I guess is how I'll phrase it. You're in the zone. And this is usually obtained through routine. In that routine, I think a lot of people don't understand the importance of routine, but it does have a very strong effect on our mood. And that's actually why a lot of times if I have a client that has come in and they're having anxiety or some other negative emotion that's causing them distress, the first thing I ask them is, do you have a routine? And if they do have a routine, I ask them to shake it up, change something around. And that usually disrupts the mood a little bit. Because here's how it works, okay? So you get in a routine And essentially this creates predictability in your brain. So your brain knows, okay, I wake up, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And so it can predict mood, essentially, like, okay, so I'm going to be feeling content this morning. Then I'm going to be feeling a little frustrated when I have to go drive to work, and then so on and so forth. So your mood is almost set on a schedule. And that's where the flow comes in that once you have settled into this routine, then it creates a sense of, honestly, contentness, because you know what's coming and you know what to expect. And that's kind of what happens for me with certain tropes, when tropes are just played straight. Because I know what's coming, but I also know the emotion it's going to trigger in me. So you guys know that one of my favorite tropes is the mama bear, papa wolf, the parent that comes, or the family that comes and protects the person they love. And I love this trope. It creates such a sense of euphoria for me. So when I see a story is heading that way, and then it subverts it and it doesn't do it, it crushes me. Like, my mood dips, because I've been prepping for essentially this rush of good emotion, and it doesn't happen. Now, what does this mean then when you do a twist on a trope? Well, I find, kind of like with everything, one of two things happen. Either people, they really like the twist and it creates essentially surprise, but pleasant surprise, or they really hate it and it creates that downward drop that I was talking about. So in my mind, you need to do both in your books. You should have some tropes or ideas that you play straight. You should have some that you twist around. But I think what's most important is it needs to make sense in the story. So like, for instance, if you're planting all these little clues about who, let's say who the killer is going to be, let's just say that. And they're very specific clues that can only relate to one person. And then at the very end, you say, oh no, it's actually this person, even though the clues don't match up. It's very incongruent and it feels weird, and readers notice it, and most of the time they don't like it. But if you were to throw clues in that were vague enough that they could apply to several different characters, but it seems to lean more heavily on one, and then you switch it to another character, that can work, because then the makeup of the story still makes sense. It's the pathway still makes sense. The way I look at it is if you're laying foundation and clues and things like that for the story going a certain way, it's like a pathway through the woods. Now, I can believe it if a pathway in the woods opens up on a lake or a river, or maybe even like a farmhouse or something like that. But if I turn the corner in the middle of the forest and I am suddenly faced with a gigantic mountain that is made of solid ice and it's like 80 degrees outside, that makes no freaking sense. And that's kind of what certain tropes do if you subvert them just to subvert them. So that's kind of my thing on this trope, in that don't be afraid of predictability, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can trigger emotions, good emotions in your reader, because sometimes people seek out books specifically because they do certain tropes. That's why I love epic fantasy. I love the tropes in epic fantasy, and that's why I go after epic fantasy. It's why I don't go with contemporary, because contemporary doesn't fulfill that emotional need for me. So I hope you guys found this interesting. As always, if you guys have comments or suggestions, please leave them below. I'll get to them as soon as I can. I try to upload at least 2 times a week, hopefully more. If you guys don't want to miss when I upload, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you get notified whenever a new video goes up. And as always, if you guys have suggestions or certain topics you want me to talk about or discuss, please let me know. I'm always happy to do that. And until next time, I hope you guys stay safe. Have a good one.